Thank you for tuning in to this meeting of the Downtown Development Authority. This meeting will start at 8 a.m. Please keep your sound on, and we'll see you soon. Thank you for tuning in to this meeting of the Downtown Development Authority. This meeting will start at 8 a.m. Please keep your sound on, and we'll see you soon. Thank you for tuning in to this meeting of the Downtown Development Authority. This meeting will start at 8 a.m. Please keep your sound on, and we'll see you soon. Thank you for tuning in to this meeting of the Downtown Development Authority. This meeting will start at 8 a.m. Please keep your sound on, and we'll see you soon. Thank you for tuning in to this meeting of the Downtown Development Authority. This meeting will start at 8 a.m. Please keep your sound on, and we'll see you soon. Thank you for tuning in to this meeting of the Downtown Development Authority. This meeting will start at 8 a.m. Please keep your sound on, and we'll see you soon. Thank you for tuning in to this meeting of the Downtown Development Authority. This meeting will start at 8 a.m. Please keep your sound on, and we'll see you soon. Thank you for tuning in to this meeting of the Downtown Development Authority. This meeting will start at 8 a.m. Please keep your sound on, and we'll see you soon. Thank you for tuning in to this meeting of the Downtown Development Authority. This meeting will start at 8 a.m. Please keep your sound on, and we'll see you soon. Hello, and welcome to this live stream of today's public meeting brought to you by Downtown Gun Rapids, Inc. We will begin shortly. Please keep your sound on, and we'll see you soon. welcome to this live stream of today's public meeting brought to you by Downtown Gun Rapids, Inc. We will begin shortly. Please keep your sound on, and we'll see you soon. Hello, and welcome to this live stream of today's public meeting brought to you by Downtown Gun Rapids, Inc. We will begin shortly. Please keep your sound on, and we'll see you soon.
What am I doing?
Good, thanks.
Good now? Good. All right, try again. Good morning. I would like to call this meeting of the DDA to order. Our chair is out of town today, so I am presiding as vice chair, and welcome to you all. As our first order of business, we will look at the minutes from February 9, and I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes. If there are any additions or corrections, please say so. Is there support? It's been moved and supported. No additions and corrections? None heard. Those in favor of approval, please say aye. Any opposed? All right, moving on. We have our February 28th financial reports. Ms. Chapman? Hi, Tracy.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Diana.
Before you have your statements as of February 28, 2022. You can see, again, you're in a good cash position, nice and strong. All the expenditures that are on Statement C are what was spent in just February. Highest spending this month was on streetscape and admin. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, would just look for approval. I'm sorry, Statement D is your expenditures for February, and I would ask for approval for Statement D.
Any questions? If not, I would entertain a motion to accept the financials and approve Statement D. It's been moved and supported. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, moving on. The next item of business has to do with the River Equity Framework and Action Plan, and Andy Guy is going to brief us on that. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
James, you doing good on this? Good? Thanks. Okay. Wanted to chat with you all a little bit about a river equity framework and action plan to really guide the revitalization efforts along the corridor in the years ahead. The overarching goal here is to have some really good conversations to define what we mean by equity in related terms, identify some goals and strategies that we have as a community as we start to implement the work around the river corridor, and then importantly, also identifying some metrics for success so that we know when we're doing what we said as a community we wanted to do and that we're holding ourselves accountable to those goals. So maybe just a little bit of a step back. About a year ago, the DDI board, the DDA board, and a few others endorsed a governance model to guide river revitalization efforts. There was a lot in there, but some of the key takeaways were, and what we've been working on over the last 11 months or so, organizing the nonprofit entity to really start to bring the leadership together around a common table and chart a path forward. Establishing a founding board for that. They are right now working, finalizing bylaws. We'll be getting to work on a business plan that should be done here in the spring or early summer. And then also working with the Community Catalyst at Public Agency around a community engagement strategy to guide that nonprofit startup work, and that should be completed this summer as well. So the next big step here is getting to work on the equity framework recommendation. We talked a little bit about this in previous planning efforts, River for All, GR Forward. We also, as we were doing our due diligence, researching best practice and having local conversations around what we might do here for a governance model, it became obvious as we were talking to other communities, having some guiding document in place that the community had agreed to before these projects get started was very valuable to their efforts. We also observed as we were having conversations locally here that there's broad agreement that an equitable redevelopment strategy for the river is very important and a shared priority. We've got some work to do to get together around common language, common goals, and how we're tracking our progress moving forward. So that's really what this project is about, figuring out what equity means through the river revitalization efforts. After we endorsed that governance model, we convened a work group that figured out how to move forward on this recommendation specifically. That group pulled together a request for qualifications, issued it, received a number of responses through evaluation of a variety of criteria, experience, strength of the team, and some other things. A team led by Angel City Advisors and Estelano Advisors emerged as the preferred option. I won't go into all their criteria, but I think a couple of things that really jumped out at us about this team. One, direct experience in river revitalization efforts, which is pretty rare nationally, frankly. And the other is that they've got a broad experience across a range of issues. They've worked on economic development strategies, housing, climate, workforce development, and some other things that will most likely influence this conversation in some ways. So after identifying that team as the preferred option, we also took a little bit of an unusual step in these types of processes because it's such an important and sometimes sensitive community conversation. We really wanted to make sure that the community was aware of this project and that we were taking some extra steps to introduce this team, this prospective team at the time, to the community. So we organized a couple of Zoom calls over the summer with a variety of stakeholders. We also hosted the consultant team in here in Grand Rapids for a couple of days. Those conversations went very well. I think the team was very well received in bringing this recommendation forward today with the strength of those community conversations, a recommendation from the project work group, and we also discussed this with the emerging Communications and Engagement Committee of the new nonprofit organization. If approved today, we'll take this as a next step back to that nonprofit board to brief them on this and then get their support to move forward. So the request before you today is the total project cost is $235,000. We're asking the DDA to fund $195 of that, and then we'll ask the Monroe North TIFA to share in the remaining cost on that. I also have Ed Norris. Bo Torres is with us here today. He was part of the work group and was along for that ride. He's also a member of the nonprofit organization that's emerging. He can help answer any questions that you all might have.
Open the floor for questions. From your research, Andy, and your work with this group, what kinds of things can we expect to see as results of this framework and action plan?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thanks, because I know this is kind of conceptual right now. I guess I'd say two things. One, I think if we, and I meant to actually print this for you guys, look at the equity framework piece that we did in the beginning of GR Forward. That starts to kind of lay out some of the areas of focus, at least around that downtown master planning process. I think it's going to be different conversations along the river different opportunities. I think what we've seen in other communities, it's a range of topics. It's as simple as being smart about the programming you're doing along the river to ensure local visitorship in the corridor and what your programming strategy is, and it's as complicated as what redevelopment, economic redevelopment, retail ownership, business development looks like in the long term on some of these major redevelopment sites. So a lot of conversations to be had on what exactly this will look like.
Other comments, questions?
And so the observations that the consultant wrote could be written for practically everything that we do in this community. And so how to develop trust that is going to be really critical. And how, and I know a lot of this is conceptual right now, and I fully get it. So do you think that the nonprofit will communicate to the community, okay, this is what's happened in the last 3 weeks, or, you know, it's how they instill that trust and demonstrate that indeed this is going to take hold, so.
Yeah, I think that's why we were intentional about some of these sort of pre-meetings with the team when we were considering them. Another step in this will be establishing a project-specific advisory board. I think one that will be a diverse group of interest and can help guide that project and connect it with community. Frankly, this is where some of the work that we're doing with the Community Catalyst will be helpful because we've been starting to build that network. I think one thing that we've also heard is a strong interest in having this being an actionable document. So, you know, there's a lot to figure out there about what those recommendations are, what the roles of various organizations are, and who's in charge for various items of implementation. Some of them might be nonprofit things, some of them might be city things or county things. If you look at that GR Forward example, that wasn't all DGRI stuff. There was community partners that we needed in that. So I think that's going to be some of the work we're going to have to do over the next 9 to 12 months, probably, of building that trust and getting towards actionable items that are moving us forward. Bo, do you want to add anything to that, or?
Just to Diana's point, we're being very proactive in the fact that we're already taking a charge and a lead and being able to have conversations proactively. So we're not waiting for conversations and for questions to come from community. We're really going out. We're speaking to organizations that are already established that have that trust to be able to answer questions and to receive information before any hurdles or any barriers are built unintentionally.
Thanks.
At some of the observations as well, specifically looking at the connectivity to inclusiveness of Roosevelt Park and Black Hills neighborhood. I'm wondering if there is or will be any conversation around incentivizing community members' participation. Because the way I see it is that a lot of the folk who are doing the organizing are actually on the clock getting paid. So like when you go to the meeting, you're not volunteering like a community member. If you're getting paid, you're on salary. And how do we kind of, think about baking that into some of these things of folk who, may want to take off work because it's important to them, but still need to have the money or their time away from their kids. So again, many people are putting on their resume volunteer opportunities when in actuality, part of their volunteering is while they're on the clock at their work. And so it's my hope that, as we move forward in this, is that we think about how do we incentivize or quote unquote pay individuals for their time. Was that a conversation that y'all have had?
Yeah, it's definitely a conversation around the work group, and as we've been out talking with neighborhood groups and stuff, it's also been on the mind of the consultant team. They've used that model in other places. I think we've got to get the project up and running and determine what exactly that looks like, but it's definitely a conversation.
So in looking at that, we didn't just bring in talent from outside of the community. We've incorporated Kamai Strategies, which is a local agency that's working in community, as well as engaging with the Catalyst to make sure and ensure, Jamila, that those are the kinds of ways that we're engaging. So not only looking at external groups that are going to be able to do this work, but really looking internally and hiring folks that are from community that are engaging with us on a daily basis.
For the thousands of Grand Rapidians watching at home, I'll just note that the memo a couple of people have referenced is actually in the packet, and it's a series of observations that consultants gave us after their 3-day visit here in Grand Rapids last summer.
Andy, do we have any concerns that, regardless of the merit and value of the work, that it falls outside of the scope of the statutory expenditures that a DDA can make?
I think that's something we'll be paying very close attention to and ensuring that any dollars that we're using for this project are being used appropriately with, as intended by law.
I think that's something that would merit some close scrutiny, because I think it gets very close to the line, if not potentially over the line.
We did have a couple of conversations about that. I think the way we've thought about it is there's likely utility for the work outside of downtown. So think about a retail strategy where the business corridors may look at some of the recommendations that are made and adopt some of them, but it's directly related to investments for parks and trails and open spaces and development within downtown. So that's how we will use it. But again, I think it's something we're going to be looking at closely. I think from a statutory standpoint, it falls really within the eligible authority for the board to do long-range planning and think about economic development within the district is how we've thought about it.
Because there are obviously other sources of funding.
There are, and maybe coming, in an ideal world, that nonprofit was up and running right now, it would be leading this. We're just kind of getting there. That organization is starting to have some conversations with foundations this spring and summer, so there's potential partnerships there, I think, to support some of this work as well. And it's a priority with many in the foundation community that we're taking leadership on this as well.
Sort of piggybacking off a little bit of Member Seeger's and Ameli's questions, this is a lot of money, and I think the study is great, and I think we absolutely should be focusing on equity, but we also, I think in Grand Rapids, have a tendency of researching things to death and not doing anything about it, right? And so I have a concern that we come up with this great, shiny study that sought all this input and don't implement it, right? Don't do much about it. So I'm curious to sort of hear you speak a little bit on the piece here of the river equity work occurs at different altitudes. What are we doing to get these other stakeholders that will be coming alongside us, right, to implement this work? What are we doing to make sure that they are ready to implement whatever the study says? I'm sure some of the outcomes will be a little uncomfortable, right, for us to hear and implement.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking to them. I mean, that's what part of the power of this nonprofit organization right now is for the first time, we've got a number of stakeholders sitting around the table at the same time talking about the river all together, right? These conversations have been a little siloed, so that's step one. As we go through this process, we're going to be chatting with them all and bringing them along hopefully bringing them along on what the consensus is in terms of how we want to act and what our vision is for that river as it relates to equity and inclusion and diversity. So very robust communication, engagement, talking about shared interests and how we're moving forward together.
Do you get a sense that there is buy-in, at least at these early stages, from other stakeholders?
I do, very much so. I think people are hungry for direction on what we're doing together to move on whatever the goals are, I'd specifically note that the city and the county's leadership on this as they start to turn their protocols, processes, and things like that, particularly on the construction side of stuff for this, so in the near term.
We have, as various communities in the community have learned, highlighted in the proposal is the piece on compensation that Jamil was referencing, you know, that's not something that we actually did a lot of prior to the last 2 years. Boy, did we learn. And so what I'm hoping is that that the framework and the action plan truly will be useful for other movements, projects, what have you. Because right now, it is, you know, equity can be a divisive this conversation, or it can, how we can bring people in and how we can unite them is the challenge. I know it's a challenge for the Community Foundation in the work that we do. So, I'm eager, a little anxious, eager to see how this all transpires. But, you know, if there's a way for us to be, contribute thought leadership to this, and so that if we could have this reported on periodically or monthly or whatever, and it doesn't mean, okay, this is what it's more about, this is what we've learned, or we're stuck. You know, the thing that is that sometimes in our community, failure, and I'll use that word, looks to be the worst thing that could happen. It isn't. It's learning. And I think we have to have some level of the phraseology, some grace in all of this. So I just put that out there. And
Thank you.
So it sounds like the direction we're going in, hearing what you're saying, is that there will be a model that might be influential on other community projects coming out of this. A model that's embedded in the action plan of how to do it.
Yeah.
Fair statement?
It's possible, yes.
Possible?
or at least a path forward.
Right. Anything else? Any other questions or comments? We have before us a request to approve an allocation of funds not to exceed $195,000 for this project. Do I hear a motion to that effect?
I move approval.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion on the motion? Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Okay.
We have, the motion passes with one negative. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Good morning, Marion.
Morning.
Our next topic is the data services funding authorization. That sounds glamorous.
So we are approaching our one-year renewal for Placer AI, which is a premier location-based analytics tool that we've been using. You've seen it through the Vitals report. A lot of our external communications have been around that for foot traffic. And so this is a good opportunity to do kind of a new overview on it for you guys. There's two main ways that we use this data. The first is, thank you. The first is by dividing the DDA into these 7 sub-regions and then reaggregating it to, draw conclusions for the whole DDA. For today, we're just going to look at the center city, which is this center one, just for the purpose of ease. From that, we can draw conclusions on 3 different categories. We've got our visitor group, our employee group, and our residents. These are all algorithm-based, so actually the employee graph really shows this really well. The employees are designated by if they spend around 8 or 9 hours kind of in the same place, so that's why you can see that weekends are lower. And this is, I should say, this is for Center City, it's just for 2021, and it's a daily count for each region. Sorry, am I in your way? This is what the trade area looks like, again, for the Center City in 2021. We'll get more into that a little bit later. And also this is, the threshold is if somebody has visited Center City 1 time in 2021. And it goes nationally. This is the routes most used to get to Center City, to the Center City polygon. This you've probably seen in some version. We can, from those subgroups, look at the trends in hourly visits, the daily visits, and also length of stay. This is what the demographics we can pull look like. It kind of looks underwhelming, but it's really nice because we can draw time over, or year over year, month over month changes. This is what the customer journey looks like. So you can kind of see where a user was before and after they traveled into Center City. This is interesting, obviously, Van Andel's on there, you got some founders, but what we really look at, or what we find interesting, for example, for World of Winter, is the percentage that come from home, specifically to come to Center City, as an example. And then the second way that we can use placer data is not so much by what is happening in the polygon, but rather where the trade area that is defined by the home locations of the people interacting with the polygon. So basically where people are coming from. This is set by a threshold. So you got your 40, 60, and 80% threshold. The colors aren't really good for right now, but you get the idea. And then on top of that data, we can layer a series of data sets. Obviously, you got your census. We're pretty familiar with that. Experian Mosaic is an algorithm-based data set that groups users and consumers in specific groups. So for example, you got your aspirational fusion, singles and starters. Those are all defined by an algorithm. They're also named by an algorithm, I just learned, which is a little bit creepy. And again, you got your 40, 60, and 80% thresholds. And then these markers, the contrast is a little low, but the markers, they're actually benchmarked to the nationwide index. You can also switch it to the statewide index. And they just told me yesterday that they're looking at doing a countywide index as well, which will be really interesting. So this is the same math, but for a different data set. This one is called Market Outlook. And this is basically your supply and demand, and therefore your unmet demand for the overall, but also, right now it's just listed as automobile dealers, but there's a whole slew of different markets that they do this math for, and same deal, 40, 60, and 80%. And then you're probably thinking, okay, trade area is cool, but it would be really nice to look at just downtown. And the closest thing we can do to achieve that is, instead of looking at the trade area, look at the distance in miles. So here I've set it so that it's a 0.5, 1, and 1.5 mile radius from the Center City polygon. And then after that, you're doing the same math. So in this case, we have looked at a different data set called spending patterns. Again, I try not to think too hard about this because it is a little creepy how much they know about you. But this is your weekly spending per person on average for those radii. So, in this case, we're under-indexed nationally for healthcare in really core downtown. And then lastly, same idea, but a different data set. We've got workplace. This is what it sounds like. It is basically the type of workers interacting with the Center City polygon. So obviously, it makes sense that for downtown, we're super over-indexed for white collar and slightly under-indexed for blue collar. And then these are the things we're looking forward to. So the area analysis should be over here, but the area analysis is in version 1, and so is Placer Extra. Within area analysis, they have started doing a vehicle traffic volume analysis, basically, which is they take segments of road and count per day on average how many cars use those segments. That's V1. I know that they're looking at doing other vehicle nodes. Hopefully that's tomorrow. I mean, I'm really excited for that to come in. They're also adding like a directionality, so if you're going into town, out of town, north, south, et cetera. So that could be interesting, especially for our mobility friends. Plan development. We have really good data internally for all the stuff happening within the DDA, but this is especially helpful for kind of comparing what's going on outside. And then crime profile, I mean, that is exactly what it sounds like. It's mapped. It's based on local data. Yeah. And then Placer Extra. So all of the stuff I've shown you so far, we kind of integrate we export it, we use it internally, we kind of play with the numbers. The Placer Extra is mostly like their R&D team doing reports for us. And it's very retail focused. Placer, like at its core, is a retail product, but they're expanding their municipality team like crazy. Placer Extra, these are mostly reports that they're doing for us. Store opening and shared audience analysis is probably the closest thing to being interesting. It's basically if the store opens, they do an analysis on if it's helping your neighbor or if it's helping somebody down the street. So that part is kind of interesting, but again, I like being able to manipulate the data internally. So. And then coming soon, these are spatial eyes in beta. This is another one that's a little bit scary. This is looking at your online habits and mapping it. I mean, everything is location based, but this mapping your consumer habits and your social media habits, locally or location based, and they're adding. So that's just for web right now, but they're adding a social media element to this. I think that this could be interesting. Especially looking at our marketing. If we can look at Center City and see that during World of Winter, mentions of World of Winter or like photos of the snowmen or photos of the art, if that goes up in Center City, we know that we're doing a good job marketing, or in the trade area either, right? But if, for example, it's slightly lower than we wanted to in a different part of the either our trade area or of the DDA itself, we know that that's where we could focus a little bit more of our marketing efforts for example, World of Winter. Property analysis is, I'm super stoked about this one. We already have access to this data. It's basically all the parcel information, but it would be aggregated for example, as big of a polygon as Center City, or we could draw something smaller. All the parcel information would be kind of re-aggregated into the system, and we could look at your assessed value, anything with to do with taxes, obviously land area, sale information, all kind of aggregated, so that could be really interesting to look at. Void analysis, it's a void analysis. That's basically what them doing a little bit of math on what should go in certain vacancies. This is pretty retail focused, but they are, or I should say there is a void analysis that's very retail focused. They're adding a downtown version of this. So specifically for downtown, again, their core product is really for shopping centers, malls, for example, so that's perfect for that, but they're trying to look at it from more of a municipal standpoint. And then lastly, migration trends. This, I think, will be super interesting coming out of COVID, whatever that means, because, so it's on a zip code level, and it basically looks at are people coming in and settling into, for example, 49503, right? Coming out, coming in. Right now, this is on a state level, and we see that Michigan's doing well, so it'd be nice to see if the downtown zip codes are doing well, just specifically during COVID, but I think, like all of their data, it spans back to 2017, so hopefully we would get that access to that data as well. With that, questions?
Any questions? We've been seeing this data in our reports on a regular basis now, and I appreciate the fact that you listed in your printed material to us, or your written material to us, the current uses and the value added of this work. I do have one question, and that is, are you using this for any comparison to other similar downtowns across the country?
That is, I do it kind of, I haven't done a formal report on that, but that is something I look at, especially for Michigan downtowns. I kind of do it informally, but that is on my list of doing for a formal report. I really like looking at Lansing. That's an interesting, but I don't want to give any spoilers, but yeah, that is a thing. And I mean, you make a good point with looking at it more nationally, because we have some very cities that we could be looking at.
That was one of the things that attracted us to this was that Placer was being deployed widely in downtowns. If you recall, we came to this by looking at ways to replace our stagnant pedestrian counters that were infrastructure on light posts, and really just gave us a count of number of times people were passing by it. I think we came upon this and saw it as a great opportunity. Kind of spent the last year tooling around with it, and that's some of the stuff that Marianne was just describing. I think what we see is a lot of potential going forward, and so the 3-year agreement gives us an opportunity to really dive in and get some more use out of it.
That's great. Any questions, other questions, comments on this? The recommendation is that we authorize the executive director to execute a contract not to exceed $27,000 to enter into a 3-year contract with Placer.
Just a quick clarification on that, is that per year? Totality of 3 years.
That's for the totality, so $9,000 per year.
Other questions? Yes, Luis?
Quick question. Tim, you use this data a lot, right, during the pandemic to be able to track almost, I think, on a weekly basis, how things were going downtown, whether people were using, I mean, this has been critical for the last couple of years for us, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and Marion's really been helping to gather all that, and so it started in our COVID report that we, immediately started using back in, early 2020, and now we've kind of transferred it now to what we're calling our vitals report. But yeah, we're identifying metrics that we think are important to identify the health of downtown. It's a lot of use, and if there are things that people are interested in or that you want to see more of, please let us know, because we'd love to grow the report.
Other comments or questions? If not, I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
I heard 2 voices. Apparently we have a motion and support. So, any further discussion? Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? We're good to go. Thank you very much. Okay. Our next item is from Mr. Miller, Mark Miller, who is joining us to talk about the River and Hill Network planning process. Good morning.
This is just both of these projects are informational only, so you don't need to make a motion for them, but please have comments or questions as I take you through them. So I think, okay, so we are starting with the Hill and River Network. So there's 2 projects that are going on concurrently right now. One of them is this Hill and River Network. This is going to be the longer set of slides because there's quite a bit going on with this project. As you remember, we hired the Smith Group out of Ann Arbor to spearhead this project. They are also working with Disability Advocates of Kent County and Fishbeck, the local engineering firm. And really what this project boils down to is that we're exploring options for access along the hillside that connects the Belknap neighborhood and neighborhoods to the east to Monroe North and the river. And then also the street network in Monroe North and how that begins to make a better connection or series of connections through that district. And then finally, the third item is the rail tunnel that actually goes underneath the highway and connects the MSU campus to Monroe North. So this is an exciting piece of the project because it begins to frame a potential pedestrian and non-motorized network that can get better access between these various districts moving forward. So the project really is looking at all 3 of those things. And just as a note, we have had 12 different engagement sessions for this project to date, 8 in the last month. Some of the people that we've talked to or groups that we've talked to, the Michigan Department of Transportation, obviously, because the highway runs adjacent to this, and they do own property both on the hill and adjacent to the highway. We've talked to Spectrum, MSU, the Monroe North Business Association, fitness groups that actually use the stairs on a regular basis. There's actually 400 people who are within these groups. So we've been talking to them, and they obviously have a different take on some of this stuff than residents or business owners. We've talked with the City of Grand Rapids, the Downtown Neighborhood Network. We've had a couple meetings with our steering committee. And obviously, we had a really good meeting last week with the neighborhood, the Belknap neighborhood. And again, they have a little bit different take on some of this stuff than other stakeholders simply because they live adjacent to it. So this slide really begins to show some of the various pieces and parts of this thing and analyzing what's going on in an existing way. As you remember, there's a stair that's still functional on Fairbanks. That's the one that's used by the fitness groups and mostly people who are commuting back and forth between the neighborhood and downtown. There's one that is also at Newberry that is in severe disrepair and not really usable at this point in time. So 2 stairs. Those stairs are very important to almost everyone that we talk to, at least maintaining or improving them moving forward. So I think that that's something that we have to keep in mind. You can see that the Beaumont Health, Spectrum Health campus is shown on here. That's obviously a very important piece as we start to discuss the connection and the connectability of this to the river and the hill. And so we've had a lot of conversations with them. This is actually a diagram of what's going on here from an elevation standpoint. So the hill is actually about 100 feet above Division Avenue. So that's a 10-story building. And that's important to keep in mind because moving up and down that becomes a trick in terms of how we're going to navigate that. And then for many people who don't get over there very often, there's actually about a 7-foot difference between Division and Ionia. So yet another sort of climb or transfer of verticality. And then there's obviously another drop down to Ottawa. So there's quite a bit of dynamic in terms of the grade here and how we're going to navigate that and think about that in terms of some of these connections. As we've begun to develop this, we really have obviously connection as an issue, but there's a whole bunch of other things here in terms of accessibility and comfort, people-centered design, sustainability, mobility, and then durability and longevity. And oftentimes we don't put this into our projects in the past, but we're really starting to think about it now because what we build, we want to be able to maintain. We want to figure out who's in charge of maintaining that and making sure that so the stairs are clear, in the wintertime so that people can use them, or the ramp that we build is operational 4 seasons out of the year. So we really are diving into that as we start to move into the more design aspect of this project. Who are we designing for? We're designing for a whole slew of people, different ages, different abilities, residents, students, the business community, employers and employees. Some of the interesting conversations we've had with both Spectrum and MSU is some of their employees obviously use this network to get to and from work. And so they're very interested in how we can make that network better for those people going back and forth from work, and also to the medical complexes on Michigan Street. So those are all important considerations, and then obviously all the various people who are using it in terms of how they're using it, whether it's exercise or commute or sightseeing, whatever that may be. So we've moved into this idea of concepts, and we're at a very high-level concept at this point in time that we're sharing with stakeholders. So some of the things that we've discussed with them is and this goes back to GR Forward, in terms of how this ramp, this switchback might affect the hill. And I think that we've landed on this idea that we're not building an at-grade ramp. It's not going to be something that's sitting on the ground because that's very invasive and disturbing the hillside. So it's going to have to be some kind of elevated ramp that sort of snakes through the forest, what's left of the forest there, and also trying to minimize the disturbances of the hill. There's also been a lot of discussion about mechanical methods. So the middle top photo is actually a funicular that is in Edmonton, Ontario, or Edmonton, I'm not sure what province that's in. But it's not a manned thing, so it's actually just automatic, and that gets you up and down a hill. The stair next to that funicular has been designed for both people who are commuting and people who are recreating on the stair. So it's got a series of places where you can stop and sort of rest. And then the other idea that has come out from a mechanical method is an elevator. And the elevator that you see here is not a 10-story elevator. So we have to think about how that would interface with this. So we have a series of ideas. The mechanical stuff has come up primarily from the disability advocates community. And that's because one of the things in the earlier slide that you may have noticed is a ramp to get down that 100-foot hill is at least a third of a mile and probably closer to a half a mile. So that might be great for people who are recreating and even people who might be commuting, but somebody who is a wheelchair user is probably not going to be using that on a regular basis. just because of the amount of time and effort that it would take to get up and down that ramp. And that's something that I think as we started this project, we weren't really considering. So the value of having the disability advocates community involved in this project right from the start is proving beneficial, but also it adds a great deal of difficulty to the discussion in terms of how we actually begin to implement some of these things. So as we go into some of these various concepts that we've been talking about, one of the things that we wanted to do was having these evaluation considerations for each of some of those approaches that we're taking. So this begins to tell us on a very broad level what some of the implications are for these various concepts, whether that's environmental sensitivity, how much hill disturbance is there, for instance, how much complexity and cost to the construction of the project, how much maintenance might be part of the project, and then obviously the accessibility and user experience. So this begins to give us a broad idea when we're looking at these various concepts. There's 5 basic concepts that we've talked to stakeholders about to date. Any of these can be manipulated in a variety of different ways. There's probably 30 or 40 different concepts when you take all the variations of these. But we tried to keep it simple for people to give us some feedback about where some of these things might land as we start to move forward with developing more precise concepts. So the design development phase of this is really the next step, and we want to get at least a broad idea of what the things we should be thinking about as we move into that, because it's a very complex set of projects. So these go into those 5 different concepts, so you can begin to see how we're thinking about snaking the Hastings connection all the way down the hillside, how that might integrate with stairs going down the hillside at both Newberry and Fairbanks. Another concept where we add that switchback so there's more connection from the neighborhood down and from the district back up to the neighborhood. Really focusing on the Newberry piece here because that brings us into a sort of, when you get up these stairs, if you've gone up the stairs at Fairbanks, you end up at the end of a street. So it's sort of a weird location, especially if you're not used to it. If you could come up the Newberry stairs, you're right in a park. So it's a little bit different experience once you get to the top. And I think that that's important to consider. Another idea is using that mechanical means to align with the Newberry connection. The Newberry connection is important because it's the single one really that connects all the way to the river. And it's a certain connection. There's a bridge there that can actually get you across the river. The rest of the streets going south are truncated for a variety of reasons, whether that's the development pattern that's occurred or just because of grade and private property ownership that we don't control. And this is a lot more aggressive in terms of that ramp. It's important to note on all of these diagrams that ramp, that blue line represents the 1/3 to half-mile ramp that is going to be needed to get up and down this hill. So it's a substantial thing that we have to deal with. And this one actually takes out the Hastings connection. What we've learned from some of the conversations is that Hastings connection is very important to people, both the business community, the institutions, and even the neighborhood, to make sure that we begin to link that up. If you do link the Hastings connection up, it brings you all the way to the neighborhoods to the east very easily because there's already a network connection that's there going eastward. And then this is a more simple one in terms of just rehabbing that stair and thinking about the mechanical connection. And while this shows like an elevator shaft, it doesn't preclude the idea that there could be some other mechanical means to get up that hill besides an elevator. We're really in a very diagrammatic stage at this point in time. Another very important aspect of this is what happens to that tree canopy and the sort of understory that is on that hill. So that when you do a ramp, even if it's an elevated ramp that's very surgically placed on the hill, you're going to have disturbance on the hill. And I think that the yellow lines begin to represent how much we could actually think about disturbing that hill. I think the 2 other ones on the right-hand side begin to show, even if you do a tight switchback, you're probably clear-cutting the entire hill in that area. So we have to make those kind of conversations with the neighborhood and begin to make some decisions about what that means. I think that when we look at this hill from afar, we think of it as a great forest, but if you walk through it, there is quite a bit of understory that's invasive and a lot of like very, like what we would refer to as scrub material. It's not really great material. There's some good trees in there, don't get me wrong, but I think that there's also a lot of clearing that probably needs to be done and more intentional planting of other things. And it's important to also note that all that stuff that's on the hill keeps the hill from sort of sliding down onto Division Avenue. So we have to consider the environmental aspects, not only with the tree canopy and the stuff that's going on the hill, but what's holding the hill up. Because I think that we've had a lot of conversations with neighbors whose houses are right on that edge, and they do see some erosion happening, and they've seen erosion happening for at least a decade or more. So some ideas and options for the street connections. I probably won't get into this a whole lot, but you can begin to see sort of that Newberry spine that's so important to this connection. Mason is also a really good connection, but then it begins to break down to the south, and that's where we have to think about how are we connecting some of this. It's interesting to look at the Bond connection because that terminates right at that tunnel. So that sort of becomes a very important connection moving forward. But the main thing I want to highlight on the street connection aspect is as you know, the Division Avenue and the Ionia Avenue right-of-ways are adjacent to each other. So that's about 140 feet of right-of-way that's sort of redundant at this point in time. So we've had a lot of conversations with, in particular, the city at this point in time, and they've got a few plans for that. But I think that one of the concepts that we're thinking about is taking just one of those right-of-ways and using that as the Division Avenue north-south access, and taking the other one and beginning to think about it as a linear park that can be used for bike paths, non-motorized paths, and even more stormwater management type of things. And one of the interesting things that's come up in this discussion is that the Ionia right-of-way actually has most of the utilities in it. So there's minor utilities in Division Avenue. So an option here is to really begin to think about the potentially even rerouting Division to the Ionia right-of-way, and then taking the Division Avenue right-of-way and incorporating it into some kind of linear parkway that is conducive to like moving people in means other than vehicles. You can begin to see some of the connections here. This is Mason and Division, and this is sort of the connections that you begin to get here. So there's obviously the grade challenges, but also just some of the built environment that's not really conducive to getting people across that street. It's a fairly dangerous crossing, we've heard from a variety of users, so we have to begin to think about that as well. And then, so this is really that consolidation effort. So this is one of the concepts where Ionia becomes Division, and it sort of veers a little bit and then ties back into the curve at Division Avenue, and then you can begin to see the connection of the yellow line, which is connecting the non-motorized information. We've also looked at a series of roundabouts in collaboration with the city so far. And then also even using what we would refer to as a chicane, where we're actually shifting some of the lanes between those two right-of-ways in order to potentially slow traffic a little bit. So there's three different concepts that are floating around with that. And then finally, the rail tunnel. Has anybody been in the rail tunnel? No, it's a very interesting thing. You think of these things that go under highways as these dark, narrow places, but this is actually really wide and has a lot of potential. There's a lot of excitement from the design team on this, and we have so far, a very willing partner at MSU in terms of this connection. So we're sort of really excited about this as we begin to think about it. This is what it looks like inside. So there's still railroad tracks in there. There's a loading platform. It's in really good shape. Because it's been closed up for so long. So when you walk into it, you become surprised at its scale, but also the condition that it is in. I mean, it could be a really incredible space. So these are just some photos of it that we got into it one day by accident, actually, when we were walking around up there. It was open. So that's sort of the idea behind that. One of the concepts is to really use Hastings as a connection that would get us to the west and to the east, and snake that through the MSU site where they plan to build a new facility someday, probably 10 years or more out. And then this is just the schedule. So you can see where we are. We're sort of in the middle part of the concept design. We are going to move into what we would think of as the concept development. So we're going to take some of these ideas and start to design them a little bit more so there's a better idea about what we can do, how much it might cost, and then that will inform us about the next step, which is going to construction level drawings for specific projects. So we don't obviously anticipate taking all of this stuff on at once because of cost. So we have to be strategic about what pieces and parts we might take off to begin with. That might be a tunnel, it might be a stair, it might be Division Avenue. I think as we start to move through that, we'll have a better understanding of that. And just as a point of reference, we've hired Smith Group through your approval to go through design development, but not construction drawings. And that's primarily because we don't quite know what we would be constructing. In an ideal world, after talking with the Smith Group yesterday, it's still feasible to get to a point where we could be constructing in the spring of 2023, so about a year from now, but that's with everything aligning. It's more realistic, I think, to think about the following year for a construction project to give us a better idea about what we can do and how much that's going to cost and where some funding sources might be for it. So that's the end of the Hill and River Network. Are there comments or questions?
Questions? Mark, one question I have is, do you have any idea what, in the study area, what percentage of the land is owned by the city?
I don't have the percents. So obviously those right-of-ways are owned by the city at Division and Ionia. There is actually quite a bit of institutional ownership, obviously. So MSU has property, Kent County has property, Spectrum obviously has property, and then there's quite a bit of property owned by the Michigan Department of Transportation. And one of the things that we realized when we were meeting with them is that even though they turned over the Division Avenue right away, they still technically own the land. So anything that we do with that, we still have to have conversations with them. And I think that if we think about it as a linear parkway that does mobility or has mobility options, that's certainly something that is favorable to them. So I think that that's the other thing is when we think about that Hastings connection, that's obviously city property, but right next to that is MDOT property. So we would have to think about how we might work with that as well. There's still some fragments of other smaller parcels that are privately owned, but I think that situation is relatively dynamic at this point in time.
Okay, good, thank you. Yes, Luis?
Sort of along those lines, I assume this is going to come with a big price tag at some point. It's a pretty hefty project. About how much are we expecting to end up funding for that?
I don't think we've had a solid discussion yet on that. I think that you're right, that it's in some ways daunting, and that's why we would talk about it as a series of incremental projects. So as an example of some of the research that we've done and some of the past studies that have been done, it's important to note that this area has been studied multiple times over the last 10 to 12 years, going all the way back to the Mobile Noble project, which was, I think, about 2004 or so, 5. And during those studies, they actually cost estimated one of the stairs going up that 100 feet. And at that time, which was 2018, that stair cost about $800,000. So you're right in the sense that these are very cost-sensitive projects. And I think that one of the questions that has come up during our discussions is when we talk about a mechanical means, obviously that's thought of as very expensive. But it's not free to build a ramp, for instance, right? And that has maintenance implications as well. So it's going to be a matter of like looking at these various things and then balancing that with, the other things that are going on as we think about a much broader network moving forward. So I think that as we move into that design development phase, we're going to start targeting specific projects, and then we can get opinions of probable cost associated with those projects. And I think that will begin to help us to inform some of the decision-making about how we might actually fund that. We have a lot of interested partners at this point in time. We've had a lot of meetings with Spectrum Health so far, and we've had probably 2 or 3 meetings with MSU so far. So I think that they're very engaged, and they're obviously very interested in what happens in this whole district, including the park and the river.
Yes, Greg?
Mark, with all those conversations, are there any, I won't say red flags, any yellow flags that any of the would-be constituents are raising, concerns that they have, that you haven't covered? I think we heard some of them through the conversation about, you know, the canopy and protecting some of those assets, but anything you're hearing from would-be stakeholders that are yellow flags?
Not yet. You know, I think that you mentioned there's a lot of concern about the hill and the stability of the hill. That's primarily from the neighbors who are most affected by it. I think that there's also a lot of, I won't call it concern, but there's a lot of interest in sort of the connections in the Monroe North District. And that's primarily because of the amount of land that is being developed, I think primarily for Spectrum. And Spectrum is very interested in how their employees move to and from, and how the neighborhood moves to and from, and how they connect to the park, to the river. So I think that right now we have very engaged stakeholders, and I don't think, like I said, I don't think any red or yellow flags at this point in time. We've had a lot of good conversations with them.
Thank you.
Yes.
2 questions. One is, just for my edification, I'm wondering how old those stairs are, 'cause I think that's important to the conversation of just, you know, historical purposes. And then number 2, I'm wondering if, you know, if there's some learning from the zoo in terms of, you know, when they installed the tram or whatever you call it, the people mover, because they have to, you know, affect that hill as well.
Yeah, I think that the stairs potentially were done in the 20s or 30s, probably as part of a WPA project. We have images or photos of them being constructed, so, and we don't know why one is in better shape than the other, but they're both not in great shape. I think they've served their lifetime, and it's probably time to think about, like, what's the next piece. As far as the mechanical means, I think we have looked at the zoo, we've talked about that, and our design team has looked at a lot of other things. So like in Pittsburgh, there's this Duquesne incline that's about 100 years old, 120 years old. It's been running up and down that hill since then. It's actually, there's an operator there, so it's a little bit different than what we would be anticipating. And that is actually a 400-foot hill. So it's 4 times what we're talking about here. So I think that we are looking at precedent. We also, when we had a meeting with the DNN last week, there was a couple folks who've been to various places. Like Los Angeles has something very similar that runs up and down stairs. So she was actually naming all of these various places. We've heard a whole bunch of different ideas for that mechanical means, but again, that's like a balance of cost, maintenance, operation, and thinking about how that might work in the future.
Any other questions or comments? If not, I invite you to move into your next topic.
This one's a little shorter because it's a lot less complicated in the sense of the project scale. So as you know, back in 2020, we reconstructed the Van Andel Plaza on Fulton Street, right in front of the arena. Our Arena South plan actually envisioned a pedestrian connection running from Fulton all the way down to Oaks that would terminate at the Studio Park Piazza. So this project actually is piggybacking on that Van Andel project and really using the 2015 plan to begin to think about what could happen here. And these phase diagrams are just placeholders at this point in time for us to begin to better understand how we take this thing on in various ways. So what we're really thinking about doing is accentuating the connection, obviously, between Fulton and Oaks. This shows a three-phase potential project. There's a lot of complications here in the sense of property ownership. So the city of Grand Rapids owns the alleyway that's right here behind these buildings. Van Andel Arena owns all of this property. The city owns Weston Street. DDA owns this sliver of property, and then the RDV Corporation owns this piece and actually all of this parking. So there's a lot of different pieces and parts that we have to sort of work through on this. On this particular project, we've had 11 stakeholder meetings so far, 8 in the last month. We've met with ASM Van Andel Arena twice during that period of time, and we're meeting with them again next week from an operational standpoint. We've met with the business owners twice, and we have another scheduled meeting with them coming up next week. Those business owners that I refer to are all of these property owners and business owners in these buildings. So there's a residential, that's obviously a management company that we're meeting with to represent those residential folks. We're meeting with all the ground floor businesses. We've met with all of the various building owners that are in there as part of this discussion. Then we've also met with the city of Grand Rapids, both engineering and Mobile GR, because this obviously has implications with that alley and access in that alley. We have met with the DNN, the steering committee, and Goal 3 so far on this project. So quite a bit of back and forth with this as we've worked through the designs. This one's a little bit further along, obviously, than the previous one. But it's still somewhat conceptual in terms of where we stand today. Our next step is to go into more design development with this. Just has a snapshot of what's going on in the northern part between, so the Van Andel Arena sits right here. Those buildings sit right here, and then this is sort of the reconfigured space that connects the plaza. One of the big things for the business owners in particular is seating along the back edge of those buildings. So if you're on Ionia, you don't have a lot of space to do outdoor seating. There's just not a lot of sidewalk space there. We learned that during the COVID times. So what we're really doing is adjusting the limited access area, the alleyway, to be right down the middle, which happens to coincide with two very large sewers that are in that area. So it's nice not to build things on top of those. So that's helping to inform some of our design decisions. And then there's another zone here that's more pedestrian, but also temporary vehicles parking for big events. So if you're walking around the arena during a big event, you'll see like various trucks and vehicles parked there for servicing those events. And that's a very important piece operationally from the Van Andel Arena standpoint. Even yesterday I was down there and there's trucks everywhere for the Tool concert. So there's not quite enough space for all of those big trucks and buses. So this is a plan view of that. You can begin to see where the seating is being planned or proposed. This is the place that's flexible in terms of the vehicle and pedestrian access. We're greening the alley as much as possible, so there's a lot of planters, new trees being proposed. Then this area here at Weston becomes another sort of what we would think of as a linear plaza. So I forgot to mention this, but right now there's curb and gutter that separates that alley. The plan with this thing is to make it all one level, so it's just a plaza. So this is all, from a paving standpoint, all at the same level. So it's a flexible space in the sense that it can be closed down. An event can be held there, depending upon the circumstances. So there's always going to be sort of different pushes and pulls on this, and that same grade level actually would exist on Weston as well. So you sort of mount up here 6 inches, and then you're all at the same level. I think one of the big dilemmas here, and the one that's probably at the forefront of a lot of our conversations, is if you go down that alley today, there's a lot of trash, right? A lot of trash receptacles, recycling. There's even some spent grain for the brewery. What do we do with that if we're going to put seating there? And I think that's been the conversation that we've had most with the business owners. Actually, one of our early conversations with some of those folks, they thought we should try to think about consolidating it. So one of the things that we're thinking about is consolidating it over here. So you take all of that trash, put it here. Obviously, people have to, if they're over here, they have to cart that trash. That has not been an issue to date. We're going to find out more when we have another meeting with them. But so far, everybody's been like, yeah, we'll trade that inconvenience to get seating. So it's a matter of making that trade in their minds from a business and operational standpoint. We also are planning to still put a Portland Loo over here, so you can see where that is. We've sort of stopped that plan at this point in time until we have a better idea about what's going on here before we actually insert that piece of infrastructure. This is just sort of an aerial view of that, so we're really trying to bring down the scale of it with lighting, like overhead lighting, some structures, light poles, banners, and then you'll notice that the paving pattern actually has a whole series of these sort of stripes in it. This thing is not working. There we go. Right here. That is sort of reminiscent of the rail yard that was there, so there's some idea about like how to use some of that legacy to inform some of the design decisions as we go. This stuff over here is all the stuff that's been built as part of that plaza reconstruction. This was the study of the trash, so you can begin to see that we've looked at how many dumpsters are there, how many we would replace, making sure that we can get more capacity, actually, than what is there right now. So far, as I said, that's been a very positive conversation. It's sort of the piece that either makes or breaks this, I think, moving forward, because we can't intermix the seating with the trash. It's just not really going to work from a standpoint of people wanting to be there. And then the second piece of this is really that connection from Weston over to Oaks. That's primarily a pedestrian access. It is today, it would be in this concept, but has a lot more like opportunities for various seating elements, trees, planters. A lot of the same context that's created at the plaza would be pulled into this in terms of the design aesthetic. Some images of that. One thing that I should note is that there's a lot of conversations about pop-up incubator kind of retail that could happen here. So they're beginning to show these little kiosks that can actually are portable and can fold up. Those could be used during various events. They could be moved around. But thinking about how those might interplay with this in a long-term format just as a way to begin to activate some of these edges. And then finally, that piece that stretches to Ionia where the sort of planter is today, that's the 3 different ownerships. But figuring out how we actually better connect Ionia to this area with this little sort of plaza space. So this is showing some images of what that could look like. Again, these are all very high-level concepts at this point in time, but you can sort of get the flavor of how that might play out in the future. And then just some more sort of images of that restaurant seating and really studies about how we bring down the scale of some of that stuff to make it a little bit more intimate in its seating area. And then some images of some of those pop-up kiosks that could exist. And yet some more. So just again, you can begin to see sort of the flavor of where this thing is headed from a very conceptual level. So with that, I'm happy to take questions or comments.
I have a couple of questions. One, what's the anticipated timeline on completing the plan?
So we have hired MKSK to do the full set of drawings. So we will have construction drawings likely by the end of this year, at which point we can bid and permit.
And then my second question is, has any thought been given to the idea of public restrooms in that area?
The Portland Loo is actually, we do plan to have a Portland Loo there.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So, yeah, so the answer is yes.
Yes.
Any other questions, Greg?
Consideration to snow melt in the alleyway.
So we've had some conversations about that, and there is the existing snow melt that's in the plaza is being powered through some infrastructure in the Van Andel Arena. That infrastructure is pretty much tapped out. It can't take on any more. So we would have to figure out where that would go, and the arena is really tight on space, and that's really the only place that it could go. So I think that most of the stakeholders have basically said, let's not do it there. I think that one of the big challenges is even those underground pipes, you know, like what, putting snowmelt over those is always like rolling the dice, you know, because what's going to happen if one of those break and they have to dig it up. So I think that we're really moving away from this idea of snowmelt, which then brings up the question of how do we maintain some of that stuff. And as I said with the earlier project, and this one is also the same, we have to think about the operations, the maintenance, who's doing what, when they're doing it, all of that sort of stuff. So that's part of this project moving forward.
Who maintains the plaza in front that was redone by the DDA?
That's kind of a collaborative effort between between our ambassadors, the DID, and the Van Andel Arena. So we have not formalized agreements with them, but we've all agreed that it's beneficial to everyone to make sure that that's maintained. So I know that they go out periodically to make sure that it's cleaned up. Our ambassadors water the trees. Our ambassadors pull weeds, so that sort of stuff. And I think that it's, even with the irrigation, so all the planters there are irrigated. We maintain the irrigation. We set it up every year. We shut it down every year in the fall. So it's even with the bus stops. There's 2 transit shelters there. It's really, the Van Andel Arena wants to make sure that those are not like trashed. So their operations folks are out there making sure that the trash is picked up and stuff like that. So it's a collaborative effort.
Yes.
Just a comment. Looking at the pictures and how great they look, and thinking about parks and Lion Square and all this, I'm just thinking about internet access, like for everybody, like free downtown internet. But I know we've had that conversation. So just a thought that came back to mind to say, man, if I was, have my laptop and do some work real quick, sitting on one of those benches under a pergola or something would be great. Would not have to tap into, some restaurant's Wi-Fi.
It's a good question, something that we can probably continue to have some conversations about. There's a lot of detail associated with pieces like that, even with music. So there's been actually a lot of discussion about, do we put music in this corridor, and who controls the music? Is it the Van Andel Arena? Is it the businesses? Is there a collaborative effort with that? Electrical outlets there's been a lot of discussion about those. So I think that the Wi-Fi probably falls under that same sort of thing. It's like, okay, well, can we do it? And if so, who's controlling it and how are they controlling it?
I can control the music.
I'll let them know.
Any other questions or comments? Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, it's now time for our Executive Director's report.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few things I wanted to highlight. First of all, wanted to point out in the packet this month there were housing numbers that we added in at the request, I think, of Member Talon at the last meeting, so just wanted to call attention to those. They were in there right after the minutes. So take a look at those. We are going to continue doing some research to get a further breakdown on unit count. So looking at studios, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom. So we'll share that with you as it becomes available. Also, I think everyone's aware, but World of Winter wrapped up on Sunday. So we had a incredibly successful event. We will actually be using some of our placer information that Marion gave an overview on to give you a report out, likely in May, given that April's looking like a really packed agenda, but look for that coming forward. And then a few advocacy-related things I wanted to highlight for you all. One, we had some great news. The governor signed an amendment to the MLCC code and changed the legislation around development area liquor licenses. So that helps simplify and clarify who is eligible for a DDA license. There was some discrepancy around whether it was new build or rehab. That change kind of removes that. So basically, as long as a new business meets the investment threshold of $75,000, they would be eligible for a DDA license, which, as you all know, is a really powerful and important tool for folks. Those come in at usually about $20,000, whereas if you are buying one of those on the open market, they're often over 6 figures. So we were excited to see that happen. It actually came after some local projects had hang-ups, including GR Noir. So we using that learning experience to make those changes. And kudos to Andy and Jessica and our lobbyists that helped make that happen. Also, social districts, so when that legislation was put into play that included a 5-year time horizon, there was also a little bit of confusion around pulling a special event liquor license. That, some changes to that legislation is actually sitting at the governor's desk, and we're hopeful that'll get signed in the next week or so. So a couple of important advocacy things have moved. The two other things I wanted to say, one, we approved this week our gain sharing rebates for all the taxing units. So if you remember our most recent DDA and TIF plan includes a provision where all the taxing units get a rebate check from us annually based on the amount of capture that we get. So this year we've approved over $800,000 in rebates that'll go back to City of Grand Rapids, Kent County, ITP, so the Rapid, as well as GRCC. So those checks will go out likely next week, and then for the coming fiscal year, in fiscal year 23, the amount goes up to 15%. So currently we're at 10%, it'll go up to 15%. Over the life of the plan, starting in fiscal year 33, some of us will still be around, but we'll see. That'll actually jump to 25%. Sorry, at the table, not. Should clarify. I didn't mean to be so morbid on a March morning. So 25% towards the end there. And then the last thing I was going to say is that we are moving quickly into our budgeting season. So I think you're all familiar. Our budgeting starts now. We'll have the presentation for you at the next meeting in April, and then come back for a full approval in May after the City Commission hears it. Those were my notes.
Thank you. All right. Public comment. Is there any public comment for us to hear today? Seeing none. Board member discussion. Any comments or suggestions from the board members? If not, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much. Nice to see you.